Davy Jones wasn't a pirate. His real name was Jack, and he was the head of the Davy clan, when the world was still the All Blue. He was married to a woman from O'Hara named Olive. He refused to give up his people, and so was banished to the bottom of the ocean to be forgotten. His kingdom at Drum Island was abandoned, and his clan, the Davy clan, were persecuted for centuries to come. Joy Boy, heir to the opposite side, the ancient kingdom, discovered this truth and abandoned his future as king of the ancient kingdom, in order to restore the Davy clan by trying to fulfill the will of Dee. Although he failed, remnants of his goals were passed down by heroes of their own respective ages, all the way up until Luffy. The will of Dee will eventually be fulfilled by the ancestors of both sides, and balance will be restored again, returning Emu and Marijua down into the abyss at the bottom of the ocean, and restoring the Davy clan to its rightful place in the sun. Not only that, but Luffy's counterpart, Blackbeard, is the modern inheritor of Davy's lineage, but instead of unification, Blackbeard wants destruction. This might be a form of revenge for what befell his people for so many hundreds of years under the world government. He's also long been portrayed as a rival to Shanks, and it might just be that Shanks is even more important than we thought. I'm talking even more important than Luffy, so without further ado, let's get cooking. Welcome, I'm Den Kushi, and this is another One Piece Mega Theory, where we dive deep into the details and try to dig up some real answers to the One Piece questions that keep us up at night. Drop a like on the video or sub to the channel for more theory stuff, and as always, thank you to everyone who supports us as a member or over on Patreon for keeping the channel alive. Right now in the One Piece world, Marijua sits at the top and is described as being divine, heavenly, and the home of the gods. On the other hand, Oda uses much darker imagery to depict the underworld and deep sea. For example, Impel Down is a hellish prison at the bottom of the ocean, based on the most famous story about hell in history, Dante's Inferno. On multiple occasions, characters have referenced the world being flipped, such as Whitebeard. This implies that at some point the world was the other way around, with the Davy clan at the top. So it seems centuries ago, the Davy clan had conflict with another clan, mirroring what we know about the ancient kingdom and 20 allies. The kingdom that lost this conflict can be found at the bottom of the ocean, just like those who break the rules of the Davy backfight. In other words, just like losing a crew member to Davy Jones' locker, Fishman Island was lost and sent to the bottom of the ocean. We know this is not where it resides naturally because of the promise Joy Boy made to return Fishman Island back to its rightful position in the sun. In chapter 1160, someone in the crowd at the God Valley incident asks if the Davy members are related to the Buccaneers, implying a connection. The Buccaneer kingdom could very well be under the ocean too, as we saw an underwater kingdom with a symbol that Kuma is always seen wearing. We can distinguish this from the pawpaw symbol by the number of appendages it has. A third candidate is the huge kingdom shown during Vegapunk's speech, in which he says sea levels rose 200 meters, and we got a glimpse of an absolutely massive sea creature. So when we say the world was flipped, it might mean that the Davy clan and its allies were banished to the bottom of the ocean. It could be that one by one, Davy Jones lost his allies, in something later symbolized by the Davy backfight. This could also suggest Davy's crew literally tried to get him back from the bottom of the ocean. This would mean the underworld and the hellish motifs we've heard about, such as devil fruits as well as the sea devil, may also inherently be connected to Davy Jones. It could help with some other ideas too, such as the straw hat in Marijua's cellar being Davy Jones' hat. After all, it does have to belong to somebody. Down at the bottom of the ocean, there is another character cursed by the heavens to wander for eternity in One Piece. This is Vanderdecken I. His ancestor Vanderdecken IX bears some resemblance to Xebec, and he features in chapter 625, which is called Uninherited Will. In this chapter, Vanderdecken IX talks about a family secret, but the title tells us that Vanderdecken has misinterpreted his ancestor's secret. This is much like Blackbeard, who has inherited Xebec's will but misinterpreted it, so now wants complete destruction. Xebec did not go to God Valley to destroy the world, despite what the world government makes people believe. Chapters 1159 and 1160 showed us he went there to protect his family. Up until now, Blackbeard has only been suggested to have family members in some sketches of his mother and sisters from One Piece Magazine 8. That said, at God Valley, we saw Blackbeard's mum look like Nico Olvia, Robin's mother, implying Blackbeard's mother figure is from O'Hara. This fits with Blackbeard's stated hobby as being a historian. If this is true, it could place Blackbeard in a position where he could protect Nico Robin from the world government, redeeming Xebec's true will. The important thing is Xebec's desire to protect his family, or in other words, protect his clan. This mirrors Luffy, who also wishes to protect his clan, although in this case, his clan applies to everyone he deems a decent person, as opposed to being classified by lineage. Epitomized by the Grand Fleet, Joy Boy's promise to raise Fishman Island from the bottom of the ocean into the sun foreshadows Luffy as potentially the one who will restore the Davy clan into its original position above the sea. However, there is another candidate also. In order to do this, however, Luffy needs to find the One Piece and become Pirate King, which means the Straw Hats must first find the final road poneglyph. We've been told it's carried by the man marked by flames, also known as Hinokizu. What's strange about this is the description we've had of the man marked by flames fits really well with Van der Decken. Firstly, the ship has black sails, just like the Flying Dutchman, and the man marked by flames is said to be able to create whirlpools, something Fishman Karate was explicitly said to be able to do. Hinokizo is remarked to be old, and you don't get much older than Van der Decken I. Additionally, the poneglyph that's with the man marked by flames was taken around 26 years ago from the sea forest at the bottom of the ocean. The sea forest was introduced in the Fishman Island arc, and the antagonists of this arc were Davy Jones, whose name connects to Davy Jones, and Van der Decken, who, as we mentioned, has an ancestor that strongly evokes Davy Jones. The sea forest is interesting for another reason as well. Years ago, we were told that everything that sinks in the sea ends up at the sea forest via sea currents. This matches perfectly with the description of Davy Jones' locker. It gets weirder though because the sea forest is where Joy Boy was introduced. In other words, Joy Boy's debut was at the bottom of the ocean. This is in contrast with Emu, who was introduced at the top of the world in Marijois. Considering Davy Jones' relationship to the deep ocean, this is confirmation that Joy Boy and Davy are inherently connected. Interestingly, the trees in Skypiea store the souls of the dead, so Oda may be hinting that Davy Jones' soul is within the sea forest. Alternatively, he could still be alive, now named the Man Marked by Flames. Joy Boy is also associated with the road poneglyphs, adding to the connection between him and Davy. We recently learned that Rocksteady Xebec and subsequently his son Blackbeard D. Teach are members of the Davy clan. The phrase Davy clan definitely resembles the infamous D clan, but it's unlikely the D stands for Davy. We know this because in Xebec's conversation with Harold, he said his name was Davy D. Rocks. So unless Xebec's true name is Davy Rocks, the D means something else. As a quick side note, Davy Rocks would actually fit in some ways because that is the naming scheme we use for devil fruits, right? But yeah, I'm guessing it isn't Davy. Joy Boy is connected to the Will of D, but we don't know Joy Boy's name, and the title Joy Boy itself doesn't have a D in it. Maybe this means Joy Boy is not actually a member of the D clan, but instead just a follower, unlike Davy Jones. So maybe Joy Boy's mission was to reflip the world and restore the proper balance. Interestingly, we can speculate that Joy Boy's counterpart, Emu, also had a relationship with the Davy Jones clan. Xebec brought up the name to Emu for a reason, something provocative. We can look for clues of this relationship in the story when we look at the Davy backfight. Luffy's tattoo clearly matches Xebec's Jolly Roger, so Luffy here represents Davy Jones himself, or the Davy clan. In contrast, Foxy represents Emu, which you can find details on in multiple Reddit posts and YouTube videos. So Emu likely had something to do with banishing Davy to the bottom of the ocean. This is also implied by the 3 rules presented in the Davy backfight. And all of this fits well because Emu is the head of the world government and is the #1 person trying to push the agenda that the D clan are bad. Additionally, readers presume Emu is immortal, and we know Davy is cursed to live forever at the bottom of the sea, mirroring each other. I recently discussed immortality in relation to the Sea Devil, and it's possible Davy has a connection to the Sea Devil too. For example, in Jinbei's cover story, a mountain of food is left for the sea god. The food is mistakenly picked up by Wadatsumi, a character tied to Blackbeard through his appearance and number scheme. Blackbeard is of course Jonesian, so Oda is showing us a sea offering here that is picked up by a character connected to Davy Jones. In another scene, we learn that in the One Piece world, wine is left in barrels as an offering to the sea god. Now, wine raises 2 red flags here. Firstly, we have Pink Sake, which we'll get into, and secondly, it brings us to the topic of bars in the story. Why bars? Well, Shaki was dubbed the crown jewel of Hachinosu, an island tied to Davy Jones, and she left the Kuja tribe to set up a bar. She also had a spider on her shirt, and spiders have 8 legs, fitting Blackbeard's number scheme. Another relevant scene takes place in the Spider Cafe, another bar, and it evokes Davy Jones. And again we see the mention of a spider. Luffy and Blackbeard first met in a bar where Blackbeard drank alcohol and Luffy drank milk. Blackbeard recruited the defector Kuzan in a bar. Ida set up a bar in the underworld of Elbaf, and the underworld is synonymous with hell, at the bottom of the sea, or world. There are plenty of examples, but the point is that there are lots of connections between bars and Davy Jones. So what we're being told here is that Davy Jones has a connection to alcohol. This draws some interesting connections between Davy and locations like the Vodka Kingdom and Tequila Wolf. Finally, what's at the top of the world? The sun. And what's at the bottom? The abyss. So does the Davy clan have some uncanny access to the same abyss ability we've seen Emu manipulate? Okay, that's a lot of questions, but let's start breaking it down with the most important cover story that pertains to Davy in the entire story. Hatchi is a character deeply tied to Davy Jones. We know this because of his name and form. Hatchi means 8, he has 8 tentacles, and he's an octopus fishman. Octopus have 3 hearts, so all this fits with the 3-8 number scheme we keep seeing with Blackbeard, Sebek and Davy. It's the reason why Hachinosu, which was introduced during the Davy backfight as Pirate Paradise, uses the prefix Hatchi. Straight off the bat, we can see the cover story is called Hatchi's Seafloor Stroll, evoking the bottom of the ocean, ergo Davy Jones' locker. The cover story starts with an image of Hatchi leaping from a marine ship into the sea. There's 2 things going on here. One is that we are seeing Davy Jones' descent from a high place that's affiliated with the world government. So this means Davy Jones or the Davy clan are originally from a place above sea level and probably high up. So think Sky Islands or Drum Rockies or even the Red Line. The other meaning is actually pretty dark and involves slaves, both alive and dead in the real world, being thrown into the sea during the slave trade. We know this happened in our world because it greatly affected the migration of sharks in the area, and a couple pages later in the cover story, Oda shows us a shark. But the big thing to take away, like I said, is the descent. It's Davy going from a high place related to the Marines to a low place related to the ocean. Moving on to the second page is chapter 183, fitting the 8-3 number scheme again. In this page, Hatchi makes friends with the inhabitants of the bottom of the ocean. In page 3 of the cover story, Hatchi frees a black and white shark from a fishing hook. So this means that Davy saved someone from being hunted. The colour is significant here, as it tells us this symbolises a buccaneer, like Kuma's black and white colours. The reason why the buccaneers are shown to be a shark here is because people are generally scared of sharks. They're classed as dangerous. So we're getting the idea that the buccaneers were persecuted by the world government for being dangerous. And at some point it does seem that Davy had met the buccaneers during his time in the locker. This shark reveals a devil fruit in a freezer at the bottom of the ocean, amongst a washed up shipwreck, and gives Hatchi meat. So this tells us that Davy was introduced to devil fruit and possibly Davy Jones' future locker by the buccaneers. In Hatchi's cover story, Hatchi brings the meat to the surface, where he finds a man with a cowboy hat sitting against a tree. Hatchi gives the man the meat, and in return the man gives Hatchi a diamond ring. The fact there is a tree in the centre of the island and a man with a cowboy hat leaning on it tells us this is symbolic for the island of Ohara and its people. We know this because an island with a tree in the centre evokes the tree of knowledge at the centre of Ohara. And also, cowboy hats are worn in the story by characters tied to Ohara, such as Robin, her mother, Saul, and Ace, who looks uncannily similar to Robin. So what's happening here is we are being shown that Davy Jones met the Oharan people and helped them when they were in need by providing food. In return, Hatchi receives a diamond ring. Diamond rings are mentioned in Brooks' song about Davy Jones when he sees the Flying Dutchman just before the Straw Hats reach Fishman Island. The ring represents marriage, and the fact it's given to Hatchi by an Oharan suggests his wife is from Ohara. This is echoed in chapter 1160, where Blackbeard is being held by a woman that looks like Nico Olvia, Robin's mum. So from this we can deduce that for sure there is a relationship between Ohara and the Davy clan, which could actually mean that the Davy clan has been around for 5,000 years, because the tree of knowledge was said to be planted by Oharans 5,000 years ago. This gets a little stranger because in Hatchi's cover story he receives a trident from the Goldfish Kingdom after giving the diamond ring to a royal goldfish. In return, Hatchi received a trident, which is the weapon of Poseidon, and Hatchi later uses the trident to subdue a sea king. This means that Davy Jones received the power of Poseidon either himself or through an alliance with an underwater kingdom, potentially suggesting Davy was actually married to Poseidon or something. So it's ambiguous whether Davy was married to an O'Haran woman or Poseidon. However, one option is that Davy and someone from O'Hara had a child that became Poseidon. But if you guys have any ideas what the relationships are here, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Later in the cover story, a sea king is about to eat a boar-fish hybrid, confirmed in the title, the giant sea boar being chased by a sea monster. The important thing to note here is that the boar signifies emu, as you'll know if you watch my videos, as this is not the first time we've seen this. So it seems that Oda is telling us that Davy Jones used the power of Poseidon to save emu. Next, Oda shows us that inside the boar, so presumably captive of emu, was a young female mermaid, Cammy, and her companion. This mirrors Vivi being captured by emu. Cammy sometimes comes up in One Piece series because she is often accompanied by the Medaka mermaid quintuplets named Nika, Ichika, Sanka, Yonka, and Yonka 2, who people often connect to the gods of the One Piece world. Anywho, this cover page tells us that Davy Jones saved a young female and her companion from danger, gaining their trust. It's possible this symbolizes Joy Boy and Lily, but we'll get into that a bit later. Next, the trio encounter some old comrades of Hatchi's who inform him there is a huge bounty on the young girl he saved. However, Hatchi is tricked and doesn't receive any reward for handing in the mermaid. Instead, Hatchi finds a monstrous sea creature with 8 legs. The cover page is called X marks the spot, so this tells us that Davy instead stumbled across Laugh-Tale, which Oda reveals using the X mark. For everything you need to know about the X mark and the location of Laugh-Tale, make sure to watch our location of Laugh-Tale video, which connects the X mark with the One Piece treasure. Once Hatchi realizes he's been fooled, he searches for the culprits and ends up finding them sailing with Cammy and her companion captive. He takes on their captors and sets both of them free. After this, they return to the octopus creature that symbolizes Laugh-Tale and discover something called Secret Sauce, which looks kind of like a huge jar of honey. This is a symbol we've seen in multiple cover pages, and what the secret sauce represents here is the mystical One Piece treasure. The trio take their treasure but encounter a village that's been destroyed and its inhabitants are starving. Hatchi immediately takes off to trade his treasure for cooking equipment so he can rescue the catfish village from starvation. This gives us a clue into the nature of the One Piece treasure. It's something that is passed on in return of some sort of remedy or cure. Now, where have you seen cats before in One Piece, particularly in the sea? Alabasta, the chapter we see this cover page on, is called Vivi, so we know we're seeing Davy Jones encountering the people of Alabasta here. Hatchi acquires cooking equipment and alongside his companions feeds the catfish, saving them from hunger and fulfilling his dream of establishing a roaming food service. This contrasts what we hear about him being a greedy pirate during the Davy backfight, and here we see Davy forsaking the One Piece treasure in order to help the Alabasta Kingdom and in turn achieve his true dream. Quick side note, I think it's pretty cool how Oda added the wheels here to highlight the fact Hatchi doesn't want to just open a restaurant, but instead something that moves freely, and all of this definitely seems to jive well with the Baratie ship. But moving on, Hatchi's dream blossoms completely at the end of the cover story when he receives a ship that's a moving restaurant, decorated in octopus tentacles with a large number 8 on the sails. This mirrors Bink's sake for sure because the song tells us explicitly that Bink's sake was delivered around the world. The sails also say takoyaki, with tako meaning octopus and yaki meaning cooked here, so this strongly evokes what we saw with the whole boiled Odin situation in Wano. So we can take this cover story and put it alongside everything we know from the real world myths about Davy and the One Piece story, and we can start to really unpack this dude. When Zebek told Emu he was part of the Davy clan, it completely threw me off, switching up what most readers expected to be a throwaway character into the mix as one of the most important names in the series. In our world, Davy Jones is a legendary figure from nautical folklore, popularised in modern culture, and sometimes portrayed as the supernatural captain of the Flying Dutchman, a ghostly ship doomed to sail the seas forever. Other myths relate Van der Decken as the captain of the Flying Dutchman, but we'll get into that. Davy Jones is said to ferry the souls of dead sailors to the afterlife and is associated with curses, treacherous deals, and the sea's darker, mystical side. All three of these things scream emu. In popular media like the Pirates of the Caribbean, he's depicted as a fearsome, tentacled half-human sea monster bound to serve the ocean and collect souls for eternity. But we're here to find out about the One Piece Davy Jones. So, what do we know about Davy Jones in the One Piece world? Davy D. Jones lived sometime over 800 years ago, with his descendants having been targeted by the world government for the past 8 centuries, revealed to us in chapter 1159. Chapter 306 tells us that the legend goes he became cursed by the sea devil to live on the sea floor. Davy stated to be greedy, hoarding all the treasure at the bottom of the sea, and of course greed is an important theme in the story, emphasised by a character such as York. Vegapunk told us that Joy Boy was the first pirate, so it's unlikely Davy could have also been the first pirate. This tells us that Davy is something different, likely something from even before Joy Boy's time. We learn that Davy Jones has a locker, and like the myth, everything that sinks into the ocean ends up there. In the One Piece world, this same description is given to the Sea Forest. At one point, Davy Clan members inhabited God Valley, and the incident there happened 38 years ago, fitting the whole 3 and 8 number scheme. SBS 38 is where we get the drawing of the man himself. We know from later chapters that the Davy Clan were persecuted for some particular reason by the world government, and we can be sure this ties to Emu, since Zebek and Emu had that conversation in the flower room. For those who were unfortunate enough to see the dub, there are mentions of Davy Jones prior to the Davy backfight, but like the Alabaster Poneglyph, we don't talk about that. The Davy referenced in One Piece, along with the Davy backfight and Hatchi Nosu, are all introduced in Chapter 306. Blackbeard and Zebek's connections to Davy were foreshadowed here, such as the whole Pirate Paradise reference I mentioned. In the story, the Davy backfight is shown as the method Davy D. Zebek used to put his crew together. The Davy backfight has 3 rules. If someone is lost to the other crew, the only way they can return is through the game. The person forfeited to the other crew must swear allegiance to their captain. And lastly, if a team loses their flag, it must never be shown again. These rules imply that Davy Jones likely refused to hand over someone when ordered, resulting in the permanent loss of his Jolly Roger and a curse. Davy likely didn't have a Jolly Roger as he wasn't a pirate, but he did have a clan, so we are instead being told here that the Davy clan was removed from history. In the same chapter, Zoro's line about preferring death over living in disgrace suggests that Davy Jones chose death over giving up the Davy clan. It's also mentioned that Davy was cursed by a demon, which infers Emu's involvement. So we can speculate that Davy Jones was the head of the Davy clan. He refused to hand over his clan when they were deemed to have broken a rule set by the world government. We've seen many times in the story so far that the world government can simply rule against an entire race if it fits their agenda. But rather than handing over his people, he rebelled. Another important theme to the story. His punishment for doing so was being cursed to the bottom of the sea until the Will of D is resolved. Now, the Will of D was introduced on Drum Island. Alongside being the only kingdom in paradise beginning with the letter D, we can look to find other connections between the Drum Kingdom and the Davy clan. Hiruluk dramatically sacrificed himself during this arc, after seeing something mysterious occur the same year in the same place as the God Valley incident. Exactly 1,000 chapters later, we get Zebek's debut, and Zebek is the centerpiece of the God Valley incident, telling us that the two characters are inherently connected. Seeing as Zebek is a member of the Davy Jones clan, this establishes a connection between Drum Island and Davy. Another important character from Drum Island is Kureha. Kureha gets her name from the Reiki expression Choku Rei, the symbol for which is very similar to the swirls we see in One Piece. Choku Rei resembles Wang Ji's epithet, a Choku, and we've speculated before that they're related, tying Drum Island to the traitor of the Blackbeard crew. Blackbeard is another member of the Davy clan, and although we don't know why, Blackbeard went to Drum Island early on in the story. This could have been to retake the castle on the Rockies or learn some history about the D clan. There's actually tons of other connections leading to theories that Kureha and or Hiruluk were on Rock's crew, which you can easily find with a simple Google search nowadays. But this does make more sense now that we know the Davy clan motif is important to both Drum Island and Zebek. Finally, the crescendo of the Drum Island arc is when Hiruluk sacrifices himself to make the image of a Sakura tree, reforming the defunct Drum Kingdom as the Sakura Kingdom. A similar scene happens in Wano, where the trees were bare when the Straw Hats arrived on the island, but in full bloom by the end of the arc, so restoring the Davy clan probably has something to do with the Sakura trees blossoming. Wano is associated with the underworld with many hellish examples, and we see in the Elbaf mural people are literally going down to the afterlife and then coming back up. Furthermore, the Will of D itself is introduced by Kureha in the Drum Island arc, so it does appear that the Davy clan are inherently tied to the Drum Kingdom. The castle itself might have been where the clan originated. This fits the idea that the Davy clan were living high in the air. An extra little bit of information that might be relevant is that Ace, Blackbeard and Luffy went there, so the Fire Fruit, Gomu Fruit and Yami Fruit were all present at Drum. However, there are other locations that play into this. I mentioned Wano, a place deeply tied to Joy Boy and the underworld. Zo is another one of Joy Boy's allied nations and resides in the clouds. Skypiea is a place high up, alongside the White Sea and even the higher White Sea. Sky Islands are the home to Shandora after it is fired into the sky, a reversal of what happened to Davy's Islands. Fishman Island is another island tightly linked to Joy Boy that's at the bottom of the world, as we mentioned earlier. So there is a pattern of ancient cultures living in the clouds or in the underworld, and pretty much everyone is linked to Davy in some way or another. I mentioned bars and alcohol before, which could mean that the locations named after alcohol, such as the mysterious Vodka Kingdom and Tequila Wolf, likely also tie into Davy. After all, drum is the name of a barrel of alcohol. Let's not forget Luffy was floating in the sea in a barrel, resembling an offering to the sea god, and also one other character that's pretty important here. Karibo was put in a barrel whilst carrying a ton of food inside him. Karibo is spicy in relation to all of this because he mirrors Ochoku, both with the weird tongue and the fact he was a traitor. There's a whole theme of mutiny to unpack in One Piece, but for now I'm going to relate it back to the kingdoms allied with Davy Jones so we can keep on topic. What island came before Drum? It was Whiskey Peak, another island named after alcohol. The storyline that took place on this island was that the Straw Hats were being welcomed by the townspeople. The twist was that it was in fact a trap and the Straw Hats were betrayed. We know Betrayal is tied to Davy Jones because characters connected to the Davy clan, such as Zebek with Ochoku, as we said, Blackbeard with Kuzan, Captain John of the Rocks Pirates who died by mutiny, and Vanderdecken I, who threw his entire crew overboard for trying to mutiny. Now, what makes this so important here is a very dark bit of lore hidden in plain sight on Whiskey Peak. The island is dubbed Cactus Island because it looks like a huge cactus. The spines of this cactus are in fact gravestones, however. Thousands of gravestones, in fact. These gravestones depict a very distinct symbol, which is what leads us to something absolutely nuclear. Does this symbol look familiar? For some reason, most in the community don't recognize it, but people soon pay attention when you point out it's the same symbol above the straw hat in Marijua. In fact, it's the same symbol we see more than any other throughout the entire series, just not so many readers seem to notice. But what does all of this mean? This is Oda foreshadowing that a massive betrayal of the Davy clan took place centuries ago, leading to the death of thousands. So Davy and the ancient kingdom battled for the heavens, so to speak, and the Davy clan were betrayed as we see in the Whiskey Peak arc, and many died as a result. If this symbol is in fact the symbol of the Davy clan, then it would make sense why Oda showed it in the frozen underground of Marijua as a metaphor for hell or the underworld. Marijua is also a location high in the sky, so does that mean Davy could have lived in Marijua? Well, no, because Marijua came after Davy. That said, the Red Line, on the other hand, that's been there for a long time. We know people were living up there before Marijua was built after Whitebeard told Marco about Lunarians, suggesting it may have been the Lunarians that betrayed the Davy clan. But let me know in the comments if you have any other ideas for who it was that betrayed the Davy clan. Additionally, Marijua is located above the Eve Tree, so if the Davy clan once did reside where Marijua is now, then it would mean Davy Jones would live above the Eve Tree too. The Sea Forest is another location tied to Davy that evokes trees. We speculated for years that the Drum Rockies are in fact trees that are cut down because the heights that are given for the Rockies are exactly half the height between the ground and the Sky Islands. This implies giant trees once existed on Drum Island, connecting the Earth with the Sky Islands. The main thing to take away from this, though, is that there appears to be a connection between Davy Jones and trees. This immediately raises red flags when we think about Devil Fruit. Devil Fruit users' weakness is that they sink in the sea. Vegapunk theorizes this is because Devil Fruit users anger the sea by being unnatural and so are punished by Mother Nature by being pulled down into the deep. This was mirrored in the Davy backfight, where we learn anyone who breaks the rules will be dragged to the bottom of the ocean by Davy Jones himself. But what's this got to do with trees? Well, the Harley myth tells us that in the Second Era, the forest god tamed demons, which fans interpret as the creation of devil fruits. So forests are connected to devil fruits. This also strongly suggests that at some point Davy Jones was the forest god. Now, what's something we know about forests in the One Piece world? They house the souls of the dead, revealed to us by Robin in Skypiea. In myth, Davy Jones is tasked with ferrying souls of the dead, adding to this connection. It's complete speculation, but it makes me wonder if the sea forest being underwater means the souls of ancestors can't inhabit the trees like in Skypiea, so instead they get turned into devil fruits or something along them lines. Either way, it's particularly interesting that Joy Boy was introduced at the sea forest, along with the poneglyph and a woman from O'Hara, which is Robin. Joy Boy is a key component of the Will of D, which ties to Davy, so there must be a pretty deep connection between the two. Now, Xebec revealed to Harold he was in fact a member of the Davy clan, but he had hid his name for fear of persecution. So again, this gives us a pretty clear indication that D does not mean Davy, otherwise Xebec's real name would be Davy Xebec, which while it fits the Devil Fruit naming scheme, it seems a little redundant. And it's much more likely that the D initial connects to the moon in some ways, and we have a video on that coming out next week. Furthermore, Blackbeard is Xebec's biological son, making Blackbeard a Davy member by lineage. While the world government values lineage more than most things, we know from Luffy and others that it's not your biological lineage that's important, but instead the wills and dreams you inherit, suggesting that Joy Boy, rather than being a member of the Davy clan, was somebody that inherited Davy's will. While Luffy is Blackbeard's rival, he's an incarnation of Joy Boy, Nika and the Sun. This is not the sea, so I don't think Luffy is the one that's supposed to succeed Davy entirely. Instead, Luffy will play a different role. Davy was sent to the sea floor, aka Hell. We see countless reference to demons, monsters, and devils throughout the story, even among the Straw Hat crew. Some devil fruits seem to be directly linked to the underworld, and even Hell itself. For example, we could look at the Revive fruit, or Yomi Yomi Nomi, that allow Brook to come back to life, potentially by escaping the locker. The word Yomi itself is associated with the Japanese underworld, suggesting it's tied to Davy. So perhaps Davy came back from the dead, kind of like Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean 3. Brook is of course the Straw Hat's musician. Sound and music can be used to guide souls of the dead, like we see with the Bell of Shandora. It also ties deeply into what is probably Brook's most distinctive character trait. I'm referring to Brook's solid connection to the ferryman of the River Styx, commonly known as Sharon. Sharon is most often depicted as a skeleton on a small boat, trafficking souls from the land of the living to the realm of the dead. The word Brook actually means river, and the ferryman himself is said to be an old man that carries souls across the river that lies between these two places, much like we see with Brook's fruit. While there are tons of references to the afterlife in One Piece, the most significant arc exploring the connection is probably Thriller Bark. Gecko Moria, the antagonist, had control over a massive army of zombies, showcasing his power over life and death. His abilities raise questions about the boundaries between the living and dead, and he's gotten a lot of attention recently due to the cover story that he featured in during Xebec's flashbacks. So, coming back from the dead is a theme in One Piece, and I talked about it in depth in relation to Emu in the recent Emu Mega Theory. Again, the Straw Hats have plenty of connections to demons and hell too. For example, we saw Robin turn into some hellish creature in Wano. That said, first we look at Zoro, the Straw Hat with the most connections to the underworld by far. Enma is an anagram of Amen, and Ohabakiri means heavenly feather cutter, so straight off the bat we see Zoro has plenty of connections to the afterlife. The most notable connection is Zoro's epithet, King of Hell, and his blades contain plenty of demonic references also. This brings us to an old idea we had in the channel about Luffy's lifespan and how the reader is told on multiple occasions Luffy's lifespan has decreased for one reason or another. The premise is that readers might get to see a situation where some of the Straw Hats go to Davy Jones' locker in order to rescue Luffy. In his own journey, Luffy has had to receive several remedies which have reduced his lifespan. Most significantly would be Ivankov's hormone treatment, which took 20 years off Luffy's lifespan each time he used it, and he used it twice. Whichever way you look at it, irrelevant of Luffy's strong will, he's running out of lifespan pretty quick. The way it's talked about in One Piece makes it seem that lifespan is a separate thing in One Piece, like a body clock that ends whenever it ends. This is alluded to by characters such as Kureha in The Secret of Youth. In fact, Oda even used Kureha's age to suggest living past your natural lifespan is possible, stating humans could only live until 140, just for Kureha to turn 141 after the time skip. Perhaps Oda counts Luffy's heart stopping in Wano as his death, and that resets his lifespan, but it seems a little bit pointless to include the earlier mentions of lifespan if this is the case. After all, we do see Luffy turn really old when his Gomu clocks out. So it could be at some point the Straw Hats will attempt to save Luffy from the other side in a way that parallels the Davy backfight. We speculated in an earlier Xebec video that there's evidence to suggest Xebec wanted a Davy backfight with Emu, which is why he brought the Five Kings with him, but for whatever reason Emu did not reciprocate. It could be that the Abyss is where all of this takes place, considering its recent appearance in the story. So to summarize all that little point, considering everything we're seeing right now in the manga, we could in fact see Luffy run out of lifespan and Zoro and Sanji be ferried to Davy Jones' locker by Brook's fruit or something along them lines for them to bring him back. Now, Luffy isn't fussed about restoring any ancient clans or toppling any governments. He just wants to be free, a trait seemingly embodied by Monkey Clan members. This is how we know that Luffy isn't just going to set out on his own accord to revive the Davy Clan. He's got no interest in doing stuff like that. But Blackbeard does have another rival, however, Shanks. Shanks did not inherit his father's will. Garling's will is pretty abominable, going as far as casually dispatching the mother of his own children for the convenience of an arranged marriage. This was instead inherited by Shanks' twin, Shamrock. So while Blackbeard may be the inheritor of Davy's lineage, I believe Shanks inherited Davy's actual will. Oda emphasizes the relationship between Shanks and Blackbeard when Blackbeard fights Law at the same time that Shanks fights Kid, with both Law and Kid losing and falling into the ocean. Shanks' number scheme is 3-9, so literally one above Blackbeard's 3-8. Shanks is a celestial-born turncoat who is trying to fulfill the will of D, which is exactly what I believe Joy Boy to be, both trying to restore the Davy Clan to its rightful place to balance out the world's equilibrium. Shanks' efforts could be entirely encapsulated by a character that probably would surprise a lot of readers. It's Shanks' son. There's a small theory that's been going around for years that Shanks and Makino got married in secret, which is subtly illustrated in cover pages. For example, we see Shanks outside a church, we see Makino suddenly wearing a wedding ring, and eventually a baby is present at the Spider Cafe. If anyone out there thinks this is a stretch, bear in mind how Shanks' father Garling treated the mother of his children. So this would be a perfect contrast. When we look at Shanks' story, his character design, even the colour of his hair, this is all completely reframed with the perspective that he is the incarnation of Davy Jones. We don't have anywhere near enough time to cover everything this means for Shanks, but some important things to note are that Shanks was a celestial dragon raised by the opposite side, pirates who represent free will. Through travelling and learning the truths of the world, Shanks understands his mission is to bring balance back to the world, which is done by returning Marie-Joie back into the Abyss and the Davy Clan back into the sun. So Shanks is kind of like a child of prophecy in a way, but in reverse. Like, his destiny is formed by his lineage, but when that's mixed in with the freedom and the wills of pirates, then the power of that lineage gets put back on the world government. In the intro, I mentioned Davy's name is Jack. This is because of a few clues we get throughout the story, the most overt being the devil fruit user that is half fishman Jack, who gets stuck at the bottom of the ocean waiting to be rescued. So we can see this pretty clearly evokes Davy Jones being sent to the bottom of the ocean. But instead of surviving via a curse, Jack survived via his lineage of being a fishman. I mentioned signs of the Davy Clan in the sky. Well, it just so happens there's a mysterious and very old beanstalk there called Giant Jack. The big one, though, is in the colour spread from Thriller Bark on a gravestone. Die-hard fans of the channel will have seen me mention this before. So while this isn't watertight, there are allusions to this name Jack keep coming up over and over again, and considering the locations where we find it, we can infer that it ties to Davy Jones. I also mentioned in the intro that the name Olive fits for the O'Haran female that relates to Davy Jones, which is more of a reach, but I do think it will be the case. The idea comes partly from Robin's mum's name being Olvia and the symbolism of an olive branch that this represents, but also a ton of theories about Olive and Popeye, which people have been posting for like over 10 years, so I'll try to link a couple of those theories below in the extra info section with the others. Anyway, that is a lot of information to digest, so let's recap some things and discuss the implications. In summary, Davy Jones was most likely not a pirate because he came before Joy Boy. Instead, he may have been what caused Joy Boy to set sail in the first place, thereby creating pirates. There's some clues that suggest his name was Jack. He had a love interest from O'Hara, which is probably Robin's ancestor. His lineage was passed down all the way until the modern era, where Xebec tried to fulfill his interpretation of Davy's will and protect his family, but he failed. Xebec's will was then inherited by Blackbeard, but in a twisted way, leaving Blackbeard hell-bent on all-out destruction. Perhaps this is some sort of revenge mission for Blackbeard, but this won't return the Davy Clan to its natural place in the world, so we have to look at other characters to find who will succeed in restoring the clan. Luffy is Blackbeard's rival, but he encapsulates Nika's will and does not care for lineage in any sense, so it's unlikely to be him. Blackbeard's other rival is Shanks, and Shanks just so happens to be estranged from his lineage. Shanks, the son of the Gorosei member and champion of the Gods Knights, Garling, will restore the Davy clan to their rightful position. Considering Davy Jones is at the bottom of the ocean and the world was flipped, this tells us that the Davy clan originally inhabited somewhere high up. When we align this with page 1 of Hatchi's cover story, it tells us that wherever it was high up connects to Marines, so this implies that the Davy clan was situated above the Red Line before Marie-Joie was there. That said, there are connections between Drum Island and the Davy clan also. There is a castle on the highest Rocky, which does mirror Pangaea Castle where Emu currently resides, so this is another option for the Palace of the D clan. The Rockies could have originally been 10,000 meters tall, connecting the Earth with the Sky Islands, mirroring the path of the High West. I guess we call this the path of the High East. The Davy clan lived amongst these trees, and trees just so happen to be what monkeys live in, right? So this suggests that the Monkey clan tie in here too. In other words, the Monkey clan and the Davy clan both might originally come from Drum Island, or something to do with Drum Island. Furthermore, this puts Davy Jones forward as a possible candidate for the Forest God, fitting with popular theories that Chopper, an inhabitant of Drum Island, is the current Forest God. It seems Davy refused to give up his people, so was banished to the bottom of the ocean to be forgotten, and his clan, the D clan, were to be persecuted for centuries to come. Joy Boy, heir to the Ancient Kingdom, discovered the truth that it was the Ancient Kingdom that were partly responsible for Davy's banishing, and so he abandons his palace as future king to restore the Davy clan by carrying on the will of D. This will eventually be fulfilled by the ancestors of these two sides, and balance will be restored again, returning Emu and Marie-Joie down into the abyss at the bottom of the ocean, and restoring the Davy clan above sea level. This fits one-to-one with the rules of the Davy backfight, the motif of perspective that's highlighted in the Elbaf arc, and the idea of betrayal or mutiny. There's a one-man army in the community we call GT or G-Tennis on Discord, and he's been on a quest for vindication that Shanks is more important than even his biggest fans think, and he might just get it. So for more information on all the Shanks stuff, that's the guy to speak to. In One Piece, it's said that remembering someone causes them to live on. At the bottom of Impel Down, which just so happens to be at the bottom of the ocean, is where people are kept so they can be forgotten by the world. I mean, perhaps there's even a level 7 underneath the seafloor where Davy is kept, which would match the Sky Islands having two seas, right? The White Sea and the White Sea. If we apply the same logic to the One Piece Ocean, then it suggests there's an undersea, or an undersea. Blackbeard remembers Xebec, and so keeps Xebec alive in that aspect. Joy Boy remembers Davy through the will of D, and centuries later this will lead to the Davy clan being restored, which is why Emu wanted to shut Joy Boy down. So the will of D is keeping Davy alive. This aligns with the fact that the only part of Vegapunk's speech that was cut out was the part about the D clan, preventing the people of the world finally hearing the truth about the Davy clan. If Luffy is the Pirate King, he'd become the world's most famous person, and as a D clan member, this level of recognition may be enough to restore the memories or at least recognise the Davy clan. Or perhaps it has to be someone who isn't a D member who pulls the sword out of the stone, so to speak. Okay, now let's tie up a few loose ends, and I'll also throw out some questions for you guys to take on. For example, what's the deal with Sea Prism Stone? Surely if it has the essence of the sea, it has to be connected to Davy, right? Now, where could a valuable mineral like that be found, I wonder? Well, why did the world government say they were going to God Valley to acquire a valuable resource? Ding ding, Sea Prism Stone is probably from God Valley. Furthermore, during Xebec's flashback, we learn that the members of the D clan were inhabiting God Valley at the time of the hunting games, and surprisingly we saw quite a few of them that had been captured in chapter 1160. Unfortunately, it's likely that for the most part they won't make it off God Valley, but still the fact that they were there to begin with suggests God Valley was a well-kept secret for a very long time. It'll be interesting to find out why Shamrock was there in the first place, as he was the one that recommended the island to the Celestials for the hunting games. We know the island disappeared afterwards, so it could be at the bottom of the ocean like the other islands we spoke about in this video. This could tie into the fact that Enies Lobby and Leisure have massive holes, potentially with something at the bottom. An alternative explanation is that a summoning circle was used on God Valley to make it disappear, and potentially that could even be how Marie-Joie was moved to the top of the Red Line in the first place. Weirdly enough, a lot of the elements we've discussed today are very, very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean Parts 2 and 3. Everyone knows at this point Oda takes inspiration from tons of old and new media, and sometimes it's pretty one-to-one, such as the whole Tartarian Empire stuff. Pirates of the Caribbean has Davy Jones, a fisherman octopus dude who's in a relationship with a sea god. We also have the whole idea of someone's son taking his place and yada yada yada. However, what's so different about this particular reference is the movies almost seem to be telling us what's going to happen in the future of the story, almost like Disney jacked the story straight from Oda's notes. I recently made a video explaining that the One Piece is a special type of heart, which was pretty well received by the community, but it's relevant here also because in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy's heart was removed and put into a box. One must replace the heart with their own in order to destroy it, which seems super relevant to where we're going with the story of One Piece. For more details on the whole heart thing though, feel free to check out the video. I also love the idea that if you flip the boat, you go to the underworld, which again occurs in the movies, but rather than list every single element, maybe one of you guys has a theory for why these storylines seem so similar. Another quick point I wanted to add was that mermaids are often described as sirens that distract lost sailors, which kind of plays into the whole Davy being sent to the seafloor and meeting Poseidon. Like, he could have got lost in the ocean, Luffy can't swim, it might be that Joy Boy can't swim as well, he might have been sucked down a whirlpool, and he might have been guided by a mermaid, which ended up with him having a relationship with Poseidon. Finally, if you want a rabbit hole to go down after all of this, I mentioned Sky Islands being tied to Davy, right? Well, if we take a look at Jaya, there are plenty of holes there, and look around there for Davy clues, and let's just say you might find something very spicy. So hit me up in the Discord if you do find it. If not, just drop me a message and I'll let you know. Anyway, in conclusion, the One Piece world has a central protagonist. The twist is it's not Luffy, it's the modern Davy Jones. The modern Davy would be Blackbeard naturally because of his lineage, but this is no longer the case, seeing as Blackbeard has inherited Davy's will via rocks. If Luffy brings down the red line, the world is going to be in serious disarray, and there has to be someone to lead it. Luffy is just one aspect of the whole, the sun aspect, Nika, but Shanks is the centerpiece, with celestial lineage, but also the will of D, just like Joy Boy. He's the Pirate King Roger's prodigy, and it could very well be that Shanks has to die before the series ends. Fortunately for him, Luffy is a Giga Shanks fan, so might end up finishing off the will of D for him and taking on his son, mirroring the Garp situation and bringing the story full circle. There is a pattern that tells us the Straw Hats will meet someone at Lodestar or Laugh-Tale. This pattern starts with the Roger Pirate Crocus at the start of the Grand Line giving lore about Laugh-Tale, another Roger Pirate Rayleigh giving lore about Laugh-Tale halfway up the Grand Line, and now Scopper at the end of the Grand Line, whose son will likely give us lore about where to go next, Lodestar, Laugh-Tale. This tells us that at Laugh-Tale we'll meet one more Roger Pirate, but it can't be Roger himself, so who will it be? Well, it will be the person who inherited Roger's will directly, Shanks. Shanks will meet the Straw Hats before Laugh-Tale, give them the final poneglyph, reveal what Roger whispered to him, and also reveal that he is partly the man marked by flames. It's after this that he'll travel with Luffy, and maybe Luffy will give Shanks' hat back or something like that. From Hatchi's dream and other characters like Big Mum, we can see that Davy was someone who travelled the seas delivering relief in the form of food, alcohol, music and parties. We did see Shanks do this with Whitebeard as well, he brought him wine when he was sick. For the sake of argument, we could call this sort of stuff a banquet, so a huge banquet is not Luffy's dream after all, as some readers have speculated, but in fact the service that Davy Jones was carrying out around the world, probably before his life was flipped upside down. Again, this completely mirrors Bink's sake and what's going on there. Emu was likely originally from the abyss, which is either the deep sea or the darkness even below that. It could be that their places being switched led to the creation of fishmen somehow, or people being stuck in the ocean and adapting. But anywho, that brings us to the end of the deep dive into the legend of Davy Jones and his possible place within the One Piece world. I know I skimmed over some sections. You can always hit me up on Discord to chat more about certain points because we do have loads more examples and references that we could have included, but we just didn't have the time. If you made it all the way through this hour-long voyage, you are the real crewmate. So thank you for sticking with me. Of course, a theory like this is pretty much never finished, and Oda's storytelling leaves us with little bits and pieces that still need adding up. So if I did miss a connection that you spotted, or if you've got any ideas who Davy Jones was, feel free to put them in the comments and I will get back to you. I'm always keen to hear other ideas and start building new theories, right? So leave your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed the deep dive, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free, it massively helps. And if you need something a little lighter to cleanse the palate after this, then check out our recent God's Night video. Or if you want more of the same, then we have an hour-long mega theory revealing Emu's dark backstory. For those who did make it this far, you've just won a free poneglyph straight through the letterbox. So enjoy that. Thanks again. You guys rock. Laters taters.